Today we're talking about hacking and why Scott Morrison's being such a little bitch about it. So the Prime Minister came out this morning and told a bunch of Australians that we were under cyber attack, that various parts of government, both local and state and private industry, were being infiltrated by large-scale cyber attacks on a regular basis by a state-based actor. Here's a little clip of him saying all of those things.
I'm here today to advise you that based on advice provided to me by our cyber experts, Australian organisations are currently being targeted by a sophisticated state-based cyber actor. This activity is targeting Australian organisations across a range of sectors, including all levels of government, industry, political organisations, education, health, essential service providers and operators of other critical infrastructure. We know it is a sophisticated state-based cyber actor because of the scale and nature of the targeting and the tradecraft used.
And the thing you'll notice about that little speech that he gave and subsequent marks thereafter was that a certain word was definitely not mentioned at all, and that word was China. Because there's a few countries that have the ability to undertake large-scale cyber attack operations over multiple different industries and areas in the space of days, weeks, months on a consistent basis. And there's a handful of them. There's not very many organizations that could undertake such a vast scope of hacking attempts. Iran, Russia, and of course China. The reason I think it's got nothing to do with the first two is because they don't give a shit about us. Like, Iran doesn't even know we're here most of the time. But China, there's been a substantial beef growing with China, and if you don't think that it's important that we sort of address it and deal with it, then you don't know how dependent we really are on China economically. So according to the ABC, in the 2017-2018 year, Australia exported $123.8 billion worth of goods and services to China, which approximates about 6.7% of our total GDP. GDP standing for Gross Domestic Product, meaning basically anything that a country does that is of any economic value. So to say that we're reliant on China is the understatement of the century. This is not the first time this has happened. In September of 2019, there was a report about China allegedly hacking into all of the major parties here in Australia, that being the Nationals, the Labor Party and the Liberal Party. You'll notice the Greens wasn't included on that list. Sorry, Greens, get some seats. Basically, sweet fuck all has been done about it. And understandable, given the coronavirus and everything that's been going on, our attention has been elsewhere. But cybersecurity is an increasingly emergent threat in the 21st century. And it seems like very little is being done to do anything about the problem, number one. And number two, actually acknowledge that it is in fact China who is behind these things. Numerous security officials last time and this time have attested to that fact off the record, right? Because they don't want to be credited with pissing off China single-handedly. But it represents a really big problem. This is a country that is massively powerful, that has huge resources, is pretty pissed off with us right now because of our insistence on having an inquiry around COVID-19 and various other factors. Boo-hoo, you guys want to have a democracy that's accountable. And not that I'm an isolationist or anything like that, but it does make speeches like this from Jacqui Lambie very recently come into kind of stark relief. Play the clip of that now, please, future George.
The rest, we just need to make sure we're getting our goods from a diverse range of sellers. Because when you're so reliant on a single country to sustain our own living standards, we are vulnerable to diplomatic or economic shocks that we cannot control. Shocks that could come just by running the country in a way that's consistent with our own values. Here, we value the rule of law. We value free and fair elections. We believe in privacy. We believe in presumption of innocence. We believe in freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of political expression, freedom of thought and movement. This is what we're proud of, because this is the Australian way. But our way of life is being propped up by a country that is hostile to it. It is a recipe for disaster.
Not to mention that there's a bunch of unanswered questions about the role of Gladys Liu, who was LNP minister, who has a bunch of outstanding questions about her involvement with the Communist Party of China, as well as allegations of spying in Australian universities from Chinese foreign actors. And you've got a recipe for something really potentially quite explosive. But the first step, Scotty from marketing, the very first step, before you can really take any substantial steps to addressing any of these issues, is admitting they exist and admitting that China, the Chinese government, not the Chinese people, we all love the Chinese people, but the Chinese government has a substantial role in what is unfolding. The longer you are reticent to acknowledge that, the longer we will go without really substantially addressing the problem. China is a bully in the Asia-Pacific region. I mean, look at what they're doing in the South China Sea with the Philippines and other nations around them, trying to build islands and take over territory. They are a cynical bad actor. And for them to be outraged about any sort of implications that we might be making is an absolute joke about their involvement. We know it was them. Who else has the motivation, the resources, and the ability to do anything like this? It's China. So number one, use the word China in a sentence, Scott. Number two, don't be afraid to take them on. Number three, we all need to start taking cybersecurity really, extremely, very seriously, including infrastructure, public resources, intellectual property from private industry. These are all extremely important to the future economic prosperity of Australia, and they're all under threat right now. So just say the word China, just so I know you know. Anyway, would love to hear what you guys think about this. If you think someone else in particular is behind the attacks and you have some reasoning as to why, I'd love to hear it. Leave your comments down below, and see you in the next episode. Peace.